There's perhaps no better example of Congress governing from crisis to crisis than the debate over raising the debt ceiling. Remember, raising the debt limit doesn't authorize new spending, but it does allow the government to continue to borrow to pay its existing financial obligations. While it makes for great political fodder, Congress has always met the call to avoid default. In fact, since 1960, it's acted on the debt ceiling 78 times. Despite hitting the debt limit this time on January 19th, the Treasury has taken extraordinary measures to avoid a default, but it's only temporary. We've got a bunch of options on the table for dealing with the current situation. Congress can simply raise the debt ceiling, but the more conservative branch of the Republican Party, which controls the House, is demanding significant spending cuts before raising it. On the other side, dozens of House Democrats have pitched legislation to do away with the debt ceiling altogether. And then there is the far-out option that would allow the Treasury to mint a platinum trillion-dollar coin. Let's dig into it all with economist James Galbraith, who previously served as executive director of the Joint Economic Committee of Congress and is now chair of government and business relations at UT Austin. James, Washington is heading for a showdown, that's for sure. But what would happen if Congress doesn't meet its deadline and does default? It's never happened, so we don't really know.
Well, it has never happened for a reason, which is that practically speaking and legally speaking, constitutionally speaking, it can't happen. And since it can't happen, it won't happen. The Treasury, Secretary Yellen, just a couple days ago on her trip to Senegal, held a press conference, and she made some very important clarifications and points, one of which is that the Treasury is not set up in such a way that it can stop payments on anything. It simply does these things automatically according to law, and every one of those payments is required by law. It's it's authorized by Congress, it's appropriated, it is a legal mandate, so that they couldn't stop them without congressional authorization to do so, debt ceiling or no debt ceiling. So a lot of what's being talked about in terms of, even in your introduction, about the possibility of default or the kind of crisis that might occur, it's a scenario which, as I say, it can't happen, and therefore it won't happen.
So if legally the Treasury still has to keep making these payments, but Congress holds the purse strings, if Congress doesn't allocate this money, what is the Treasury left to do?
Congress has allocated the money. Congress has, from the beginning, interest payments are required. Social Security payments are allocated by law. Civil service salaries are allocated by law. Military expenditures allocated by law. The laws exist. So you can say, well, there's this other law which says they can't exceed the debt ceiling. Well, that's a bit like saying that you're holding up a stop sign in the middle of the interstate highway. You can hold it up. That doesn't mean the traffic's going to stop. And in fact, not much will happen. So that's really the way to think about this. This is a political show. It's a bit of a farce, which has been played out many, many times. It's surprising that people aren't tired of it or questioning the reality of what they're saying about it. And there are political reasons that both sides like play this up, but that doesn't mean that they're speaking to economic or for that matter, legal realities.
Some Democrats want to abolish the debt ceiling altogether. If we look at it from a consumer standpoint, I can't imagine a credit card company telling a consumer, here you go, here's no limit, spend whatever you want, especially a consumer that's holding over $31 trillion in debt. Would abolishing the debt ceiling be a ticket to irresponsible spending?
No, I mean, the Congress has allocated that spending. It's required by law. My Social Security payment, the Medicare payment, is not irresponsible. Those things have been provided for a long time. Interest payments are required by law. They're not irresponsible. One can have an argument about the whole scale of these things, and that's underlying this, that is such an argument. But using the debt ceiling as leverage to change the fundamental structure commitments of the American government is a tactic which can only work if in particular the Democrats and the administrations cave into it. If they don't cave into it, it will be exposed as an empty tactic. The problem here is that the Democrats have always, and for many years, used the threat of some kind of calamity, of financial markets, this or that, as a reason for doing what they pretend is otherwise an unpleasant obligation to raise the debt ceiling. And they say, we did it, but we had to do it because otherwise something bad would have happened. Well, now what's happening is that you have on the Republican Party a small group of very determined people. You call them conservatives. I don't know that that's correct. Never mind. They're a small group. We know who they are, who are calling that bluff. And so now the Democrats run the risk of being trapped by their own past and ongoing rhetoric of doom and gloom on this question, and that's a danger. That means you could have the Congress coming in and everybody saying, "Oh dear, we really do have to cut Social Security in order to justify passing an increase in the debt limit." And that has happened in the past, that kind of thing, and it could happen this time. But that's the real danger. If they said no, we're not playing this game, or we're going to basically expose this as the gimmick that it is by, for example, minting the platinum coin, then it would clearly deflate that particular political story. We would see what would happen, and my very confident view is that what would happen would be nothing much.
Let's talk about the gimmick you mentioned, the $1 trillion coin. I don't know if it's a gimmick or not. The idea has been pushed for over a decade to mint a platinum coin because the Treasury has this authority. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's not a fan of it, hasn't specifically said, I absolutely will not do it. I guess that would come from the president. But does this become a real option? And should it?
Well, it is an option. It is something which is authorized by law. The law was passed in the late 1990s. The idea here was something different. It was to create a bullion coin that could be sold on to collectors and basically fund the operation of the mint. It was successful, but the law was very broadly drafted, and so Secretary Yellen, on her own authority under the law, can put any number she wants on a coin and take it over to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve accepts it. It reduces the debt that the government owes to the Federal Reserve, which is an internal accounting matter, and the debt ceiling is no longer being even close to being breached. And so it's very simple. It could be done very quickly. Secretary Yellen said it's a gimmick, and she's correct, but it exposes the fact that the debt ceiling is also a gimmick. And so from that point of view, it just clarifies what we're talking about here, which is essentially a bookkeeping exercise and nothing more. And that strikes me something that's really, it was a very ingenious discovery that the law would permit you to do this. The advantage of it is it is actually already on the books. It's something which was considered in the Obama years. And I read the other day that the president actually did consider it at that time, which I didn't know. So it's one way out, but its real value is exposing the debt limit for what it is, which is essentially a very artificial and symbolic piece of legislation.
I'd love for you to expand a little bit on that. You've called the debt ceiling a farce, a ruse. Why is it that?
Why is the debt ceiling a farce? Well, it's a show which has been running since 1917, and even in the administration of Ronald Reagan, it was raised, I think, 17 times. So every time they come around, they have a back and forth on this question, and the press, which loves to have crises to report on, reports that the world is on the brink of some major calamity, and then it evaporates. That strikes me as a fairly good definition of a farce. Let me come back to something else, though, that Secretary Yellen said the other day in Africa, which was that the Treasury has no ability to prioritize, which is one thing that some Republicans in particular suggested, that the Treasury pay interest but not pay Social Security or delay this payment or that payment. Can't do it. They don't have the software written that would permit them to do that. They can't do it under the law. And Secretary Yellen said very clearly that every one of these payments, whether it's for debt or for some other purpose, is an obligation of the United States, and failure to pay any of them would constitute effectively a default, and they're not set up to do it. They're not going to default. So I think she was pretty clear, even though she continued with what she was saying about this being a big financial risk. She was very clear that debt ceiling or no debt ceiling, the United States government is not going to default on any obligation.
Well, I'll tell you, you put our minds at ease a little bit when it comes to this debt ceiling debacle. James Galbraith, Chair of Government and Business Relations at UT Austin, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.